Welcome back to Built to Ship, the podcast where we go behind the scenes with founders and product leaders shipping real AI products into the world. I'm your host, Tyler Postal from Voker, and today I'm joined by Kunal, co-founder of Brandpod, an AI platform that helps you become an authority in your space by creating consistent on-brand content. Kunal, great to have you here.
Yeah, great to be here, Tyler. I appreciate you having me on your podcast.
Of course. No, appreciate you taking the time. Why don't we start with your background? What were you doing before Brandpod? How'd you come up with the idea?
Yeah, I have a very weird background. I was working in the CRM space for about 15 years, and then got into product development. Worked for a healthcare startup for about a year and a half. Then got through Amazon over there. I was there for about 4.5 years, and that's when the whole entrepreneurial journey started. While I was still at Amazon, my wife has a different background, and she was working with marketing agencies, and she has a branding background, and that's how we started with the whole branding thing. We have two products, and I know that we're going to talk about Brandpod, which is the more interesting product that we have right now. But it started as her trying to offer branding and positioning to her customers, and then realizing that a lot of marketing agencies need that. And that was business branding. And then over the last 2-3 years with AI related layoffs and other things, the search for personal branding has grown about 4x. And since she's had a background in that, she's built her own personal brand over the last 2-3 years, and she's followed others. And we just ended up codifying that into a platform using deep research agents. So that's how the whole Brandpod idea was born.
Amazing. Okay. I love the husband and wife co-founder situation. And you bring in the technical side, it sounds like, and she brings like the deep industry expertise and personal brand and marketing side. I'm excited for diving into kind of how you mix all that together into the AI features of the product. But why don't we just give us a short background to the audience? Who is your like ideal customer who uses Brandpod, and at a high level, what does the product do for them?
So I'm going to start with what the product does, and that kind of flows into who the target audience is. So Brandpod is a platform that uses deep research agents specifically to help do three things. It'll understand who you are, what matters to you, what are you good at, how are you different from everyone else who's offering the exact same thing in your industry. And we kind of make you go through an interview, and it captures that deep story of the why behind your why. We go deep into that, and we gather your stories on why you're doing what you're doing. That helps us build a really good brand profile on you. We then use that to figure out who your target audience is, because as part of that, you'll tell us who you serve. That tells us your target audience. And from there, we figure out what their pain points are. We use AI deep research agents for that. We also actually find the actual search terms that your target audience is using on Google, on ChatGPT, on Bing, and other things. And so everything that is driven on our platform after that is driven based on two core things: who you are as a brand and what is your audience actually looking for. So instead of, people go to ChatGPT and other stuff like, okay, I want to create this. What should I create about? This is my target audience. And it'll guess because it has been trained on marketing data and other things. And so it can guess a few things, but it's still a guess. Sometimes it's a good guess. A lot of times it's just hallucination. But we base all of that on actual search terms. So from there, we're going to find you podcasts, events, and publications. And the things that are common in these are, for example, in podcasts, these are podcasts that your target audience is actually listening to. They talk about an area that you are an expert in, and they also accept guests like you. We do the same for publications. We'll find publications that your target audience is reading. Some of them allow guest authors, some of them don't. And then we do the same for events. We'll find events where your target audience is going. Some of them allow speakers. We'll help you figure out how do you apply to them, how do you get published at these publications, and how you go and get interviewed at podcasts. And along with this, we'll also help you create content, blogs, LinkedIn posts, Facebook posts, and things like that, which is very brand focused. Like it understands how you speak, how you talk, and then it creates content that's on your brand and it's targeting your target customers.
So it sounds like you're going pretty deep into the vertical of, it's not just, here's some information about this area to make you a thought leader. It's also, here's the content you should post. Here's how
Yeah,
you even logistically get onto a podcast to generate said content, etc. You guys are really solving like the whole problem. Whereas using like a general tool like ChatGPT, sure, it can give a guess, but it's not going to, it's not purpose built for this type of problem. Does that
right.
sound right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's correct. It's not purpose-built. And that purpose-built, opinionated deep research agents is what makes our platform very different than there are other options that give you just podcasts or just events, but there's nothing that gives
Mm,
the entire breadth of thing. And we'll give you an example of how we do it for podcasts. You'll find podcasts that are relevant, but then also go and listen to the last 5 episodes. And then it gives you an understanding of this is what the podcast does, this is what the last 5 episodes are, what they do. And then when you reach out and it creates a very organic pitch email, it pulls in some of your story with something that actually happened in one of those episodes and links it and then offers you. So it becomes very organic versus, hey, I teach this and I would love to be on a podcast, which is very mechanical and people don't really like that.
very cool. Well, I have to ask, did you happen to use Brandpod to check out like our previous episodes and give you any information, or yeah?
I did. I actually went, actually, instead of using Brandpod to checking your thing out, I actually went and watched a couple of them. Interestingly, you had
Nice.
one with Extendly, and that's owned by a friend. So it was very interesting to watch that one and
Amazing.
walk through that one. Yeah.
Yeah, we're starting to get to the point where we're having kind of like referrals from folks who've been guests before, and it's a cool part to. It's cool how close knit the community is and how much we're all learning, because every day something's changing. Some of it's hype, some of it's real improvements, and it's helpful to have conversations like these where we actually like share what works and what doesn't. And so why don't we get into that a little bit? It sounds like one of the unique things about BrandPod is how, again, purpose built it is. And so you have the agent that goes out and does research on, your brand, your why, but also what your end consumers care about, those search terms. Let's assume that the research agents collect all of that properly. We can maybe touch on like how that happens later, but how do they then like store that information and use it later? Is it like within a thread within a chat, like to the LLM? Do you use like a database to store this information and then have a different agent retrieve it later? Can you share like at a high level architecturally what you guys have seen work well for that kind of like specific information
Right.
augmentation?
Yeah. So that's actually a really good question because I've seen this a lot with context windows growing. People think I can just jam everything in the context window and it'll just work. Um, for very simplistic things, it actually does work. But when you're doing complicated research, it's important to understand that the whole prompt engineering, it started with you have to have, no prompt engineering, but the latest buzzword is context engineering. But
Yeah.
context engineering is nothing more than you have a bunch of different things, and we as humans do this all the time. You're bombarded with thousands of inputs to your brain, and then it needs to figure out what is exactly really important for this particular task. And there are 20 different things, only 5 are really important, so I'm only going to concentrate on those 5. And just relying on the incremental improvement in LLMs to do that automatically may work, but we're not there yet where it'll work every time. And so a large part of what we do is a mix of, you asked me whether we keep it in context, in memory, or whether we use database. We actually use a combination of both things. There is a large amount of, like, for example, when we're doing events, it actually goes through between all the URLs that it's trying to find around events and figure out what matters, whether this is an event that matches you and who do you contact. It goes through, a typical agentic run will go through somewhere between 400 to 500,000 URLs to figure that
Wow.
information out. And it scrapes some of those. We have a smarter way of scraping. We don't scrape every single thing. But that is a lot of context to keep in window. Even if it fit, it is a lot of context to keep that. And so it's a layered mechanism where we'll store this, and then we have our own database where it gets stored. And then there is a search that goes on top of that to figure out what's really important for. So if it's a multi-layer thing, in different layers, different parts of that data is going to be important. So it queries that each time from there and then makes sense of that, writes it to a different place. And that flow kind of goes through for each agent where some of the context, again, the critical context is passed in memory to the next agent that it needs. but then there's also secondary context that's really
Mm.
important that is still stored in the database.
I like that. So it sounds like there's multiple levels here. One is like you're storing probably again you scrape like important parts, not every single piece, but you're storing like that large raw information in a database somewhere. You then like maybe summarize or truncate it or somehow manage like what are the important parts out of this large body of information that gets passed to an agent. So it has like the high level, like maybe, oh, the brand is about these three things, but you can get more information from, the
Right.
brand database if needed. And that way the agent has like, the right amount of, general context. And when they have a specific question that, requires the database, it goes and retrieves it. Does that sound
Yeah,
approximately correct? Did I
that
capture that? Okay.
that is correct. Yes.
That's awesome. I think I really appreciate you bringing up the like, even as LLMs get better and context windows get longer, it doesn't necessarily mean that yeah, sure. A lot of people say maybe one day you'll just hand it to the LLM itself. I personally think there's still going to be a need for, like, even as a human, right? Even some people can memorize things better than others. And if you could
Right.
memorize 20 math equations and have them in your head, sure, you can solve one of those 20 problems. But like, why not have a cheat sheet next to you of the equations and only kind of like think about them when you need them? You can go look at your reference doc and then make the sort of the calculation, based on the tool you need or the information you need. It sounds like that's kind of what your agent's doing.
Yeah, they are, and it's there are multiple aspects to it. It's not just okay. At some point they might get, but when people look at LLMs, they just think of the three, four big players, and you don't need the best LLM for every single call. Sometimes it's a small LLM somewhere else, an open source one, or something that you just a basic machine learning model that you've built, which will do, and that is never going to have the kind of context window that a Gemini or a Claude or an OpenAI is going to be will have. And so it also comes down to when you understand this piece, that when you, like, we did a lot of work in trying to figure out what part of the research is contextually important or which stage, and then we made a decision on which LLM is the right call. In some cases we're calling heavy LLMs, which cost us more, it takes a longer time. Also in some cases it's a simple classification. I don't need Claude Sonnet 4.5 for that. I can make do with an older model or an open source model that I could move towards. So yeah, those things also matter when you're working on these.
How did you make those decisions? Because I think one thing I also see people do maybe too much of is like they get into this optimization perfection mode where they're like, I know this model isn't the right, is either too big or too small, so I'm going to go test 50 others, and that just takes a lot of time. And there's some like trade-off of like, get it good enough. Maybe it costs a little bit more than it needs to for now, but later you'll optimize it. Do you guys have any approach, like a methodology or specific tools you use to like do that testing? How do you trade off between like, oh, I've figured out the exact right model for which step versus, doing too much overkill on that?
So I know that a lot of people go with, oh, I'm just going to look at the benchmarks for every single model open source and then see which is better. And those are great for, like a baseline that gives you an idea on which is better, which isn't. But most of those tests are very controlled tests, and it's not the real world. You're going to get thrown with a very different thing. And so when we first started, it was like, okay, we kind of need to figure out, we can't have the most expensive. And you're right, you go back and forth and you waste so much time. And I had to make a conscious decision that we're going to time box the research for a week. And if we don't
Mm,
find anything, if we can't make a decision, we're just going to go with the
I
big
like
models
that.
for now. Get it out. Once it's there, we know there is product validation, it's being used, then we can come back and optimize and bring down the cost where it's necessary. Um, and so that's how we launched. We launched with Gemini, but we have a fallback. So we use all three for different parts. There's part, and a lot of that was just mental modeling of the entire process. There is part where you need a little harder thinking in terms of logical reasoning.
Mm,
I've been playing around with LLMs for about 3 years, 4 years now. And that most of that is just based on my own personal experience playing with this. I found Claude tends to be really good at deep reasoning for specific
mm,
things. Gemini tends to be really good for longer running agentic flows. OpenAI, we started with OpenAI. At this point, OpenAI is more I'm not dishing on OpenAI, but OpenAI we use mostly for content or as a fallback agent if the other ones
Yeah.
don't work for us.
No, that's
And
great.
so in terms of testing, we built an internal tool where basically use Cloudflow to write an internal tool, which kind of gives us how well certain things would do. I wouldn't really call it an eval framework. It's
Mhm.
more a generic scoring framework, which tells us that it's very pseudo binary where, okay, this requires more reasoning versus not. And if it requires more reasoning, I'm just going to send it Claude. Right now, for everything else, we're using Gemini. But Q2, our plan is to start exploring some of the open source models that are there on AWS Bedrock, which is
Nice.
fantastic. It just makes
Well,
it easy to
I love
track
the
those.
framework that you have. It's pretty simple, and I think more and more startups should adopt it, which is more time boxed than like an accuracy metric or something like that. You can iterate and improve accuracy over time, but too many people get stuck in this optimization loop. So you say like, okay, let's say a week we're trying to get this, this LLM feature working as best we can. We'll test as many models, but once we get there, we're going to run with the best one for now. I want to pivot a bit and ask about, kind of the user interaction. There's lots of different ways to implement LLMs. The most obvious one is a chat interface, but some people have autonomous agents doing things in the background. Some people have like more deterministic like workflows where it's like step one LLM, step two LLM. So there's still non-determinism with the LLM themselves, but it's more of a structured workflow. How does the user interact with BrandPod's AI features? Is it through a chat? Is it through clicking a button and a workflow runs in the background? Yeah.
So we actually have both. Because the deep research agents go really deep in one specific area, like just for podcasts or just for that, it takes a while for things to get done. So we internally there is a supervisor orchestrator agent that takes care of orchestrating stuff with all the other sub agents, and so we internally have about 8 sub agents that go do their work. Some of them run in parallel, some of them are sequential because they require something else from the top agents. And so when the user first comes onto our platform, we make them go through this almost like a survey where we're trying to have a conversation with them and understand, tell me more about you, and then we prod and probe questions to get the real story out of them. Once we have that story, we kick off this deep research agent flow. That part is completely a background process. Different agents get done at a different cadence. The overall process takes somewhere between 3 to 4 hours to do, which doesn't mean that you can't do anything with our platform for the first 4 hours, because the brand profile takes about 5 to 10 minutes. The ICP research takes another 15-20 minutes, and right after that we do what we call as brand magnets, which is basically lead magnets, but they're on brand, so you can start pulling in stuff. It's very, instead of just coming up with a random idea, what should I build, it looks at your brand and then what your people are actually searching for, and then creates a lead magnet where the content is on brand and what people are searching for, what will be valuable for them, and you can go create that. And then by the time you kind of get done with some of those, other agents have kicked in, like your podcast research has been done, and then events takes the longest, just because finding who to contact for an event is a hard thing to do, and we end up going very broad as well with that agent, and that takes the longest. So that's the part that's sort of a backend process, and you kind of click on a button, it gets triggered. But then once you've done that, there are other conversational agents where you can have a chat with one of our conversational agents, which we call as Brainstorm AI, which basically helps you brainstorm what is your strategy for building your personal brand. Because somebody like you've been running podcasts, you're much better known. And take me for example, this is my first podcast, so thank you for breaking that thing for
Oh, I'm
me.
honored.
Uh, uh, I have no following, nothing at all. Okay. And so if I want to build my personal brand, where I start is very different from where you'd start, Tyler, because you've already done a bit of work. You're better known in a certain thing. So that agent, you can have a conversation, and it has all of this context around your brand, your ICP research, your podcast, and everything else that we're doing. So it helps you strategize that, okay, for somebody like me, it's going to say, nobody knows you. Let's start by just posting on brand content. Let's start with blogs and a few Facebook posts. And then we get a little bit of, and then also let's get you on a podcast. And so you start with some of the smaller podcasts, or depending on where you can get, you start with that. And as you build a little bit of authority, Now that gets fed back into the systems. I'm, from a scale of 0 to 1, 1 being you're super popular. Now I've, gone up on the scale. And so that research keeps going on. We also have a collaborator one, which is really interesting, which I actually used a little bit of that to do a little bit of research, because it takes a LinkedIn profile and kind of builds a psych profile on the person. And so it'll tell you what really matters to them. So it helps in collaborating with them. If you're competing, it helps competition as well. But it builds a psych profile on what is really important to them, what's socially important to them, how do they make their decisions, what's their communication style, and helps you, kind of talk in that way.
So it sounds
And
like
then
you have maybe around 3 main interaction patterns. There's like the survey, which is still chat based, but it's a little more of like a guided flow, like the onboarding survey. You have the workflows that run in the background, which are more structured, and they have been tweaked and tuned to, sure, there's like agentic parts of that, like every step might be agentic. It needs to scrape different pages or look up contacts in a different way for events, but there's probably checkpoints and steps along that workflow. And then third, you have like a more open general chat that has a much broader optionality of like what the user could ask and what they could try to use it for. Obviously, it's mostly for brainstorming, but the types of questions could be different. Am I missing anything there? Does that sound about right?
Now that's right. We have one more agentic flow, and that's something that we've just added, which is we have sort of a mini white coder inside our app. So it'll help you build your personal brand website and all your brand assets in personal brand website, your brand magnets, and then what's going to come out next week is your keynote. So we get your keynote speech ready. And so when you're at an event, and some events will have these things where they'll have like a quick 5. We'll give you 5 minutes, go on a stage and talk about anything.
Yeah.
And so we'll have all of those. We'll help you build all of those, whiteboard all of those out, so you can get started really quickly, even before other things happen. So those are the 3 main flows. There's the long workflow, the conversational, where it's sort of a guided. I mean, it's an open chat, but the agent kind of brings you back around. We're building your personal brand. Let's just stick to that part, and we'll guide you. And then there's the other, which is more like a whiteboarding conversational thing.
Great. So yeah, I'm always curious now that like companies are getting agents into production. It used to be the past couple of years we were talking about prompt engineering, we were talking about deployment, we were talking about guardrails for like just like access to tools, and none of that's figured out, but it's definitely more developed than it was. And now I'm hearing challenges with, you mentioned briefly evaluation. I think for like across these 3 different flows, or interaction patterns, the workflow is probably the easiest to evaluate and track. I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong, but like you have step points where you can check like, was a contact found for this event or not? Like those kind of things. Did the process run? Did the agent say it was completed? Whereas something like the conversational interfaces have been more of a challenge from folks that I've talked to, because they don't know what their users expect of the agent. You can tell them use it for this, right? But they still, to one person, to me, brainstorm might mean like it's gonna give me vague ideas. To another person, they might mean it's gonna give me exact copy and names of events and whatever. And some people get pretty creative with how they use these like conversational interfaces. What have you guys, seen to be the best way to evaluate and monitor these systems in production? Am I right that the workflow is the easier one and the chat's more difficult to monitor?
The workflow is the easiest because it's very and I'm gonna go slightly off topic and come back quickly to this. The reason why most production agents fail is because people have this belief that it'll do anything and everything on its own without any help, and it's like magic, and it's just going to do. It's not there yet. You have to give it guardrails. You have the best agentic flows are where you can use the LLMs as enablers for a pseudo-deterministic process. The more non-deterministic it becomes, the harder it becomes to evaluate. It'll run, and sometimes it won't. And conversational is where it goes more towards the non-deterministic, because you can never really guess every single thing that somebody's going to ask. And to your point, some people might think brainstorm is like, oh, just give me a vague direction and I'm going to go there. Somebody else wants, I want an exact 10-step process that if I follow this blindly, I'm going to get from A to B. And there's no way to predict that. And it's hard. That makes it really hard to evaluate.
I love that term of pseudo determinism. How would you describe that or define that?
So for me, the process needs to be mapped out very, very clearly. Um, I see pseudo-determinism as I'm not looking at one agent like a mother of all agents that's going to do everything for me. I have specialized, and it's very much like how companies and other people work. You have people with specific skill sets, and they do only that. They might have other things, but they're really good at that. And so you need to create it in that way that, okay, I'm not going to have one agent do everything because it becomes at some point a little too complex to coordinate. But I'm going to have one manager or an orchestrator that's going to just pass on it, figure out what needs to be done, and it's going to pass it on to somebody who really is only specialized in that. So, for example, when we do our podcast agent, there are about 3 or 4 different data sources that we use. And the tools for that agent are only those 4 data sources. So it's not going to go and search something random and then get confused because the word pod and then cast was somewhere else and it just confused and it picks up some random thing that doesn't matter. So you define the processes, you give it tools that are very aligned with what it needs to do, and don't give it other things that is only going to confuse it. And that's where the conversation thing becomes hard because we do have a generic web search tool available in there. And that's where, I mean, if it's searching for something, do I have the knowledge? And the knowledge that it checks is obviously the LLM's own knowledge, but then the context that we've provided about your brand, your ICP and everything. Do I have that? Sometimes you'll have that, but then you still need to make a decision. Okay, I have just enough, but not enough to actually answer this question. So I need to do a search for this one and then get that part. And that part becomes hard to evaluate.
Yeah. I could keep going on this forever. I do have to move us along just because we're close to time, but maybe we'll have to do another episode about this because it's been fascinating. My last question before we get to kind of sharing out a bit about, Brandpod and wrapping up is, okay, you mentioned that the conversational system is harder to monitor, harder to evaluate. With the workflow, you can have these like sort of steps and checkpoints. What do you guys use today to just keep track of like how are people using these generic agents that can do, I mean, and you've built them to not be generic, but they have an open-ended optionality, right? Like, how do you see our users using it the way we expect it or not? Where do we need to add features? How do you detect these user intents? Is it talking to customers directly? Is it reading through logs? Like, yeah, how do you keep track of that?
It's actually a bunch of different things. We talk to the customers directly. We have a town hall every week where we invite all customers, so they come and talk about. We talk about new releases. Anyone can ask any open questions. We have a very easy way for customers to provide feedback from within the app. It's a single click, and then you just type in whatever you like. We're adding thumbs up, thumbs down to responses that come back. We're also adding like a thinking pop-up where it'll tell you exactly why when it replies back with a certain thing. Why did it do that? Because it searched these things and it found this. That's why it's coming in. And so people can say that, okay, now this was wrong or incorrect. But then it also gives them a level of auditability and transparency that, okay, it gave me this. It's not a complete black box because I see that it searched this. Some of those are irrelevant, and so they'll give that feedback. We also have an internal team that keeps running this manually. I'll be honest, there are a lot of eval frameworks on how people do that. I have found programmatic eval frameworks for non-deterministic, for the lack of a better word, non-deterministic. They add value sometimes, they don't others. So our way is to have metrics at every point, usage metrics from when they click something to when they click something else, how long did they spend, so that all of that is in the UI, we capture it, but then also other things on the logs, and then actual interactions with the customers. I find actual interaction with the customers gives you a lot more gold than any amount of instrumentation and metrics that you can capture.
I love that. I love the town hall concept. I think that's really, a great value to your users, I'm sure, to get direct access, to answer questions and hear what other people are trying. Because just like we're trying to discuss how to build these systems, people are still learning how to leverage them and use them. And maybe someone's going to come up with something using your product that they're like telling everyone else, did you know it could do this? Like, and maybe you guys didn't even realize it would work well. So new technology, new industry, but the age-old advice of like talking to users, listening to them, having direct user interaction is still valuable. We really will need to do another episode at some point, Kunal, because there's a lot we could go into. But I want to put your website up on the screen real quick. How can folks kind of follow along? How can they, try out the product, and who should check it out?
Yeah. So any the target audience, I'll quickly do that. It's if you just want to build your own personal brand, you don't know where to get. The biggest problem that people have when they want to build their personal brand is like, I don't know what to post about. We completely take that out because I'm telling you exactly what your people are searching for. Pick a topic, write a small blog, write a small post, get started with that. To get started, there's a free version as well. You can sign up. Once you sign up, you can go and fill in the survey, and it'll run all of your agents. As part of the free version, you actually get your brand profile and all of your ICP research included in the free version. You also get to build your own personal brand website, and we never take that away. It'll always be available. You can continue using that for whether you never upgrade, or just stop logging in. That personal brand website will always be available for you.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that. So folks can go to brandpod.ai. Looks like you can try it out. You can, like Kunal mentioned, you can try for free or find a plan that works for you. Hopefully folks, check it out and start building their own personal brands. I think it's so true that this is like the age of, it's not about company websites and company brands as much anymore. It's like, who is the person, who are the people building this product, and so it's important to have that personal brand. Appreciate you sharing like all these learnings that you guys have found through, the labor and testing you've done. And it's generous of you to share with the community what's working well. I'd love to chat more, and we'll have to do a follow-up at some point and hear what are the new sort of architectures you're trying, as I'm sure the space evolves, and what you're adding to Brandpod. But I'm looking forward to following along. Thanks again for joining us, Kunal.
Yeah, it's a pleasure being on this. Thank you for having me. This has been a fantastic talk. Yeah, and like you said, there's a ton more that we could talk about on this.
Amazing. Well, I'm glad to be the first pod that you've made your debut on, and I'm looking forward to seeing you on many more. To the audience, thanks for listening to Built to Ship. If you're building something, go ship it. See y'all next time.